So today's daf is this week's daf is Chav Zayin, and we're going to begin on Chavav, which is really the beginning of this sugya, and this sugya is known in the yeshivas as Chalitza Psula, the sugya of Chalitza Psula. We know the Torah says that if there's a yibum, that means a person dies, a man dies, and he childless, his wife, and he has a surviving brother. His wife has to have yibum done from the surviving brother, and if they don't, chalitza is in its place, and then chalitza would end it. And as we've been learning and explaining throughout the Masechta, that the concept of yibum and chalitza is that the deceased brother's marriage passes over to the surviving brother. As the Torah calls it, Eshes Hames. She is still the wife of the deceased brother, and the Zika is going to pass that over. And we saw machlokes of whether Yesh Zika, Ein Zika, how strong this Zika is. This passing over of the marriage from the deceased brother to the surviving brother, is that an ishus? Is that a level of actual marriage? Or is it some sort of kinyan, some sort of obligation? What level does that have? But it's not strong enough to ishus. Those are the two opinions. And we saw the Mishnah and Daf Chavav really saying that these are the two explanations for the Mishnah that we had. We also saw throughout the Masechta many times where the Gemara says, Choltzim v'lo miyam. For various halachas, the halacha is that you're only allowed to do chalitza. You're not allowed to do yibum, even though the Torah obligation is to do yibum. You're not allowed to do yibum, only chalitza. And in almost all the cases, or all the cases, and we saw machlokes about that, but in almost all the cases, for sure, it is a dorabana. Meaning, really, on a Torah level, there's a mitzvah of both yibum and chalitza. But since there's no yibum midaraisa, the chalitza is the only option. That's choltzim v'lo. And in most of the cases that way, maybe one or two not, but most of the cases that's the way, because as the Gemara explained, kol she'eino oila liyibum eino oila chalitza, and kol she'eino oila chalitza eino oila yibum. They're one and the same. If there's no yibum, there's no chalitza. So there is no such thing as someone only being obligated to chalitza, not yibum. However, midorabanan there are, because there are certain structures that Chachamim put in within kiddushin, within yibum. So, for instance, we're going to see on Daf Hashavua today, balas maimer. Balas maimer is where there are multiple options for the for the yibum to take place. Whether there are multiple surviving brothers, or the deceased brother had multiple wives, and then he went ahead and one brother went ahead and either to the one wife or to the multiple wives, and he did yibum. He made kiddushin. He said, which is not the way it's supposed to be done for yibum. For yibum, it's supposed to be only yibum. And over here, he went and did kiddushin. There is no such thing. Midoraisa kiddushin is completely ineffective. However, the Chachamim enacted that there should be something like that, and they call it maimer, and we saw that earlier in the Masechta. So now, Reuven died. Shimon and Levi are surviving brothers, and Shimon did maimer with one of, or the wife of Reuven, the deceased, the Yevomos. Levi cannot do yibum anymore. Levi can do chalitza. Levi cannot do yibum anymore. Even so there's a midaraisa. The kiddushin was nothing. The maimer didn't do anything, and so really Levi should be able to do yibum and chalitza, or chalitza. But since Chachamim enacted that there is now a yibum, there is now a kiddushin that he did, which is maima. Therefore, the other brother cannot do yibum; he can only do chalitza. Similarly, so far, did I lose everyone? So far, so good. Now, similarly, Reuven dies. He has a surviving brother, multiple brothers, be it was a man, and this is balas haget. The yavam who's supposed to do either yibum or chalitza gave her a get. Now, technically speaking, the get mid araisa, the get is ineffective. It doesn't do anything. But since midrabanan the get takes effect, so now if he wanted to, he can no longer do yibum. He can only do chalitza, and that's a chalitza as well that he needs to do. Now there may be a tzara in all of these, and then there's a question: what about to the tzara? That's the Gemara later, right? What is the tzara of a balas haget? The tzara of a balas maimer, etc. Right now, just with the one wife that he did this. So in all these cases that we just said, we have a mitzvah of yibum midoraisa. The Rabbanan remove that mitzvah yibum and only allow chalitza. In this case, where you can only do chalitza, there's going to be a halacha that the Gemara is going to tell us. Rav tells us, and this is the beginning, that a chalitza pasula is not strong enough, according to Rav, to be effective for everybody. A chalitza psula is only going to be effective for the person who did the chalitza, but for the other brothers, and we'll see later, maybe for the other wives, it's not going to take effect. You're going to need to do a separate chalitza. That's the concept of that's the concept of chalitza psula. The Gemara tells it to us in a case where there are 5 brothers. There are 5 brothers who Reuven, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, Yisachar, and they 2 of them are married to 2 sisters. Two of them were married to sisters, and actually 3 of them were married to sisters, and Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Reuven died, Shimon died, and Levi died. Reuven died, and Yehuda did chalitza to Reuven's wife. Shimon died, and Yisachar did yibum to Shimon's wife. Now, when Levi dies, each one of them cannot do chalitza because it's achos chalutzase. And even though that achos chalutzase is not a real erva, not a real erva. It's not an erva that would totally aser. Nevertheless, you cannot. She needs chalitza, eino ililibim, but not chalitza, and therefore, that's a chalitza psula. That's a weak, a puzzle chalitza, not a strong chalitza. The way Rashi calls it is chalitza gerua. It's a weak chalitza and cannot take effect. It can only work for himself and not for the surviving brother. So this is, let's begin with that on Chavav and Beis. Amar Rav Rav Huna Amar Rav Shalosh Achoyes, 3 sisters, Yevomos, Shenaf Lufnei Shnei Achim, that fell before 2 brothers. So again, there were 5 brothers, 3 died. There were 3 that died were married to sisters. Now, each one of them has a achos zikukasei. Each one is achos zikukasei also, right? Because when Reuven died, all the brothers have to do the two, not all the brothers, the two brothers that are married to sisters cannot. That's an erva, but Yehuda and Yisachar would have to make would have to do yibum as soon as Shimon dies. Shimon's wife is going to be achos kukase because there's already a zika from. Same for Levi's wife. If they went ahead and did chalitza first, as the Gemara is proposing right after this, so then it's achos chalutzase. Either way, you cannot do chalitza, and therefore it's going to count as a. You're on.
Yibum? Either way, they can't do Yibum?
Either way, they cannot do yibum. And since they cannot do yibum, this is going to count as chalitzas psula. Chalitza psula. You have a question? Max?
I thought you said either way they can't do chalitza. So I was just checking that.
Sorry, if I said so, I made a mistake. Either way, they won't be able to do yibum, so they can only do chalitza. And that chalitza is going to be considered a chalitza psula. Now, so Rav says, therefore, each surviving brother has to do a chalitza, because a chalitza is only going to work for him and not for the other. Now, the Gemara says from this we see the concept that yesh zika. This is only true according to the Manama yesh zika. Amale Rabba Midik Amras and Tzoyis Richa Chalitza Mishneim Kasavris Yesh Zika. Therefore, Havale Chalitza Psula. Therefore, it's a Chalitza Psula. Chalitza Psula Tzarach Lachza Kol Achim. And another thing we learn is that Chalitza Psula needs all the brothers to do a Chalitza. So how did you understand? What's the reason? What's the connection between Zika and Chalitza Psula? And why all brothers have to do yibum? You do chalitza.
Well, he has to hold that from the fact that the chalitza is weak shows that he holds yesh zika in the sense that the zika is strong enough to prohibit relatives. So that's why he can't do yibum to her. And so that shows that from the fact that he can't do yibum to her, that's how you know that he holds of yesh zika. Because if he could do yibum to her, it wouldn't be a chalitza pasula.
Yeah, but even according to the Manama yesh zika, even according to Manama yesh zika, there you can't do chalitza. You can't do yibum, only chalitza.
Why? Because she's an achlos chalitzaso?
Yeah.
So didn't we say the case was where like they felt that it happened in an order when I know, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Okay, I don't know the answer.
This is the mechanism here, and the question of what this is going to do is really the crux of this sugya, and it seems to be a difference in Rashi and Tesis and other Rishonim. So there seems to be different points here that are said. So the Ramban here says like this. Tam chalitza psula shetzricha lechazer. The reason why, if there's a chalitza psula, it's only gonna work for him himself, and it won't pater the other brothers, and they're gonna need to do their own chalitza. Mishum the asua kapeteres hazika v'le kapeteres hakidushin shonim shalach to meet again. It says an interesting thing. When chalitza works, normally the chalitza would end the the deceased brother's marriage. However, if you hold yesh zika, Zika means there's a new ishus with the surviving brother. So let's break down the concept of yesh zika that we talked about. Yesh zika means that there's not only are you obligated in the mitzvah, but the marriage is already passed over. You have a certain level of ishus, a certain level of marriage kinyan, marriage connection with this woman. Yibum is the mitzvah to consummate that. Chalitza is ending that. But if you are only able to do chalitza and not yibum, but the zika is that it's your marriage, your ishus, so then each brother has an ishus that they're going to have to undo. However, if you say ein zika by definition means there is no ishus. So what's the ishus? Only the deceased brother's marriage is still there. Once you did chalitza, that ended the marriage. There's no marriage left. Who cares to which brother? That's the way the Ramban is seems to be saying. So this is a understanding zika, like we spoke about several weeks back and last week in just pointing out that Rashi makes that chiluk again, that the definition of yesh zika is now the yavam has an ishus. The yavam, the surviving brother, has a certain connection, marriage connection with the yavama. If there are two surviving brothers, both of them have a marriage connection. And if the chalitza is not a strong enough chalitza because it itself is the only option, so it can only work for you, so it's a chalitza gerua, it can't end the other brother's issues. However, if you hold ein zika, that means there is only one marriage here, and that's to the deceased brother. She's still eshes hames. She's still the wife of the deceased brother. So once chalitza is done, there is nothing left to do. The marriage is over. The marriage of the deceased brother is over. I think the key that the Ramban is saying here is there is still zika means marriage, and the chalitza is not strong enough to end everybody's marriage.
So the halacha of being chozer al kol achen is not specific to this case, meaning even if there's no like achos chalitza psula considerations, we would say chozer al kol achen?
No, only if it's a chalitza psula, which means that the chalitza is the only option. There's no option of yibum.
I missed that distinction. Why? Meaning, based on this, the way we're saying it now, that yesh zika means that there's a marriage to each and every brother, whereas ein zika is more of a general single marriage of the original brother. Why does it make a difference whether it's a chalitza psul or not? If there's a marriage to all the brothers, then even if you have a regular situation, right? You have a man dies, and he has a number of brothers. So each and every one of those brothers should have to do chalitza to that man's wife if you hold yesh zika, because there's a marriage between each and every one of them and this man's wife.
That's true, and that's what we say usually. That chalitza is, or chalitza yibum is doing a shlichus for the other brothers, right? But when it's a chalitza psula, that means it's a chalitza gerua. So that is a weakness in the chalitza that it cannot be done as a shlichus, because I can't do the yibum, so I can't do so the chalitza itself is weak.
Even if the other brother suffers from the same limitation, I mean, even if both brothers can't do even for the same reason?
Even more so.
No, meaning then I can't be if there are two brothers who are both usher to do even for the same reason, we're still saying that neither of them can be a shliach for the other one, even though they're both equally removed?
Shmuel is going to argue on that. Right? That's what Rav says. That's right. Shmuel is going to argue and say, look, if they both have a weak zika, so they both have a weak chalitza, so then one can do it for the other as well. And therefore, it's only not going to work in a case where one brother has a proper obligation. He could do yibum chalitza, one can't. Right? That's going to be Shmuel. But in Rav says no. Even in such a case, the point is that the chalitza itself is gerua. The chalitza itself is a weak chalitza because the whole possibility of the mitzvah is weakened. You can't do all the options of the mitzvah are not there anymore. So the chalitza itself is a weaker chalitza, so it cannot be done on behalf of the other. Now, the Ramban really only says the first part, which is that the chalitza is working on the marriage of the yavam, of the surviving brother, versus if you hold ein zika, then the chalitza is working on the marriage of the deceased brother, and he doesn't make a second part of the distinction. But the second part of the distinction is necessary in order to understand the Ramban, and that comes from the Pirush of Rabbi Avram Minahar. Rabbi Avram Minahar says this second part. I'll read the words to you. Since she is obligated in Zika, right, to both of them. And the one that did chalitza cannot do yibum. That means there's a zika that he cannot consummate. Therefore, the chalitza is not strong enough to take away the brother's zika. Therefore, the brother has to do it on his own. So again, we see in this Rabbi Avram Minahar, sort of like an added point that you would need for the Ramban, that this Nakuda, since each one has their own obligation, and the one is a weak one where they can't do yibum, so they cannot fulfill it for the other brother, that's going to define it as a yibum that is a chalitza that's weak, and therefore it cannot be done for the other. But the definition of Ramban is also necessary, which defines Zika not as the deceased brother's marriage. Yibum is not the deceased brother's marriage. Zika tells me that now the Yavam, the surviving brother, has the marriage with this woman. There's an Ishus, there's a Kinyan Ishus with the Yevama. If so, if there's an actual marriage with the Yevama, so you need to undo that, and each one has their own. Whereas if you say, like the Ramban says, that Ein Zika means that the only marriage that exists is the marriage of the deceased brother, Chalitza is going to end that. There are no two marriages. It doesn't make a difference which brother does Chalitza and what type of Chalitza is done. The point is that there's only one marriage there, and that marriage is ended by the Chalitza of whoever did Chalitza. So that's the two points, the two angles that are necessary to understand, at least according to Rashi and according to the way the Ramban and the Rabbi Avram are explained, why if you say Yesh Zika, then we say a Chalitza Psula, a limited Chalitza cannot fulfill it for the other brother, and the other brother also has to do a Chalitza. And according to the opinion, it says Ein Zika, there is no marriage there. So the only marriage is the deceased brother. So even a weak chalitza doesn't make a difference. But the point is that ended the marriage, and there is no zika left to either of the two brothers. Good. Tosfos, however, it seems, and this is the way it seems Reb Nachum and a lot of the yeshivas they learn, Tosfos has a different mahalach here, and he doesn't learn that the issue of chalitza psula is a weakness in the chalitza, but rather it's chalitza psula. The fact that you cannot do yibum means that the zika itself is weak. It's a weak zika. It's not that you have a weak mitzvah in fulfilling, but you have a weak zika. That would only be, according to the opinion, that yesh zika, which is a strong zika to define the act that you're doing of chalitza, and now that it's weakened, so you can't do it fully. But if you hold ein zika, so in any case, zika is not a form of marriage, The Zika doesn't give you issues. It's just the obligation you have. That obligation is still there, and therefore the concept of chalitza psula being a weakness in the Zika only applies to the opinion yesh Zika. That there is a strong Zika, and now it's limited to a not so strong Zika. But if you hold that Zika in any case is a weak Zika, always, so it's not going to be a weaker Zika. Something like that is what you're going to say for Tosfos. Tosfos has an Arichas Gedola here, obviously, with a lot of questions and answer. We're going to try and focus on Rashi, and not really get to Tosfos, but we'll just wanted to point out that distinction in Rashi and Tosfos. And Tosfos says these words multiple times, that the idea is that it's that loyalima Zika, right? This idea that the Zika itself is not strong. So that concept is only in Tosfos. Rashi's not learning that it's a weakness in the Zika itself. Rashi's learning that it's the Zika is strong. The chalitza is not strong enough to change that. And it's interesting also, according to, so what is the brother, what does it add that the brother does his own Zika, his own chalitza? So Pashas, you're going to learn that the brother has to do chalitza to undo his own marriage, and that's the way it seems in Rashi. Since the Zika is strong and the chalitza is weak, therefore each one has to do it because the others is not strong enough to undo mine. That's the way Rashi says it. This is the end of Rashi, right before the Dibba Mascha Kamaisa on Chavav Amid Beis and 26b. However, the Rambam holds that actually the rest of the brothers that are going to do chalitza are not doing chalitza for themselves. Rather, they're doing chalitza to strengthen the first brother's chalitza. In other words, really the first brother is doing the chalitza. That's the only chalitza that counts. However, it's a weak chalitza. To strengthen it, the other brothers also do chalitza to bring it back and reinforce the first brother's chalitza. What difference does it make if you say it this way or the other way? The Rambam Paskins, the Rambam says that when all the brothers do chalitza, only the first brother is usher in the relatives of the chalutza. So Reuven dies, and Shimon does this weak chalitza, and then Levi does a reinforcement chalitza. Shimon is prohibited in the relatives of the Yevama, of the chalutza, right? Because this is his wife's, the woman who had Zika, who he did chalitza to, and it's her mother, her sister, her daughter, or whatever it may be. The other brother who did chalitza is not us. Now, according to Rashi, that wouldn't be the case. Each one is doing a chalitza for themselves. So each one should be us. The Rambam learning that it's not a chalitza, they're not really doing chalitza. What they're doing is they're reinforcing the first brother's chalitza. Therefore, they will not be usher in the relatives of the Yevamo chalitza. Make sense? Got it? Okay.
It's funny because
go
ahead.
Go ahead. All right. Is that connected to how we were talking before about in the Machlokas of whether Yesh Zika, that the Rambam's take on it? So is like this Machlokas connected to that one?
I'd have to think about what that connection would be. I don't know. I don't know if this is a Zika vart. I think this could be a chalitza psula vart. That the point that the Rambam here in this Rambam is going to be that really midaraisa, the chalitza is really just the one who did his chalitza, and really he should have a connection because midaraisa he could do yibum, but Chazal don't let him to do yibum. So that brings a weakness in his chalitza. So it's really chalitza is a shlichus from the other. I don't know if it has anything to do with the zika part. I think this is an understanding of how the chalitza works. It's still working that he's doing the chalitza and exempting the other brothers. He's doing it for them as well. It's just that it's not strong enough, and so they're adding to it so that his chalitza would be strong enough. But
it's kind of circular, right? Because like he's doing it to exempt the other brothers, but the other brothers are doing it to support his, which is just exempting them.
It's fulfilling his. That's the structure of what chalitza is supposed to do. It's supposed to focus the zika and yibum to the one who did chalitza, because he's now representing the siblings, the brothers, in the marriage, in the replacement of the marriage of the deceased brother, of the mace. And that's the shlichus he's doing, however you're going to say the point, but he's doing it for them. So I don't know if it has to do with zika as much as just the strength of chalitza, but it could be. I'd have to think that through. I didn't make that connection, so I'd have to think that through and see if it's a related var. Yossi, you were saying something.
Is the relatives of a chalutza, right? Isn't that aser midrabanan? That's not an iser deraisa to marry the sister of a chalutza or mother of chalutza. Am I correct in that?
And
so it's kind of funny that if the entire source for the iser itself is a derabanan, I thought, maybe again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that the vart is a chazal felt that a chalutza looks like a divorcee, and so we asked her krovim because she looks. I mean, that she's like a divorcee. So it seems interesting that then they would, like, I guess, relax, or I mean, since in this case Chazal only required chalitza of the other brothers mitoch a supporting of the main brother, so then they're not going to aser the krovim of this woman on the remaining brothers, because but like, why would he be like, meaning if chalitza anyways is a concept of Duraban, and it's because when you do chalitza to a woman, it's just, I'm not necessarily asking kasha, it just like kind of looks a little funny, but maybe just because of my lack of knowledge of why Chazal asered the krovim of chalitza anyways.
yeah, I don't have anything what the reasoning why they would make it like this. The point is that once it was established as an issa kurva, the sister or the mother or the daughter of your chalutza, so then it would be it would have to be properly your chalutza, and they're saying you're not making chalitza here. This is not your chalutza. I think that's the point the Rambam is saying. It's not your chalitza, and so it's not your chalutza. Okay. So this is Rav, and then the Gemara says that Shmuel says that differently. Shmuel Amar echad chalitza kulan. One of them could do chalitza for all of them. So the Gemara challenges. You need a proper chalitza. So here we introduce a new scenario. The new scenario is that these two sisters, these three sisters, whose husbands died, they are not alone in the marriage. Each one of them has a tzara. So if you do a chalitza for the sister, it didn't exempt the tzara. right? So the case is that two sisters died, and two brothers died, and the two sisters came to the two brothers, and each one did a chalitza to one of the sisters, but there were tzaras. That would not exempt the tzara. So now we have a chalitza psula coming into a case where it's weak and passeling and not exempting. Up until now, we were saying that it won't pater the brother, the other surviving brother, the other yava. It was saying the other yavama is not going to be exempted. Now, Rashi points out that you couldn't do chalitza on you couldn't do yibum on the tzara either. So their chalitza also would not be strong. Nevertheless, it won't exempt it. Sehecha de kaima chalitza de Shimon chalitza kshera chalitz la Ruven chalitza psula. So my echad chalitza kula nami de kamar I'm tzayis. So he says that this is going on the middle one. So this is really Yassi's point before. Rabbi Yossi was saying that according to Shmuel, since in any case each one only needs a weak chalitza, because neither of the brothers can do yibum, so neither of them have a proper full zika. Now that wording works according to Tosfos, that we say that the problem is a weakness in the zika. So that you can say neither of them have a strong zika. Therefore, the chalitza of one could exempt the other as well, because a weak chalitza can get rid of a weak zika. However, the problem is that Rashi didn't learn that it was a weakness in the zika. Rashi learned that it was a weakness in the chalitza. So what difference does it make whether the brothers also can't do yibum or not? So therefore, Rashi says that he holds that a chalitza psula in general does not have to go to the other brothers. Max, you were going to say something.
Is this question only if we're assuming Shmuel holds the Zika, and that's why both women would need a chalitza?
Well, yes, the Gemara is going to come and say Shmuel doesn't hold Yesh Zika, right? That he's going according to the Manama Ein Zika, right? But at this point, the Gemara is assuming Yesh Zika, because that is the opinion of Shmuel.
Right. Okay.
Right, and then the Gemara is going to give an answer soon and say, "Oh, no, Shmuel holds Ein Zika." The Gemara says, "No, Shmuel holds Yesh Zika." So no, he's going according to the opinion that Ein Zika, right?
Yeah.
So at this point, the Gemara thinks Yesh Zika.
Yeah. So the question is, if the whole reason is that the according to Rav, or the whole reason for chalitza facilities according to Rav is that the chalitza is not good, is no good, then why does it? What's the problem with taking Rashi's explanation for why Rav holds it doesn't work and just using the same one for Shmuel? That the same way for Rav, all the brothers need to do chalitza to this woman because the chalitza is somehow lacking. So it's the same thing that when, according to Shmuel, each sister needs a chalitza because the chalitza is lacking and isn't strong enough to, or not sister, each yavama, her chalitza is not strong enough to pater the other one. I mean, what's wrong with just using Rashi's explanation from before and using it here also?
No, Shmuel is saying the other way around. Shmuel is saying that since it's a weak chalitza and both of them have a weak chalitza, so it could work one for the other.
Oh, I thought you were talking about chalitz lachayas l'nifter tzaros. Okay.
No, the next step.
You're talking about. Okay.
The next step of the Gemara says, So what was Shmuel talking about? Shmuel was talking about, of course, if one of them is a good yibum, one of them is a good chalitza, so then the one that has a good chalitza is the one that needs to do it. But if the both of them are going to have a us iser yibum, both of them cannot do yibum. The emtsayis, the middle one, meaning the one that both of them cannot do chalitza for or yibum for, and therefore they both have to do chalitza. There he says one can work for the other.
Okay.
Right? My echad chalitz lekula. And what does it mean that one could do chalitza for both? Nami de ka'amar emtsayis. It's working on this one that in any case has a weaker obligation because you can't do yibum. You can only do chalitza, so that works one for the other. And the question is why? Now, if what Rabbi Yossi was saying before, that would work according to Taisus. That he was saying, look, it's already a weak zika. It's a weak zika because both of them cannot do yibum. There's no one here that can do yibum. That's a weak zika. The whole connection, the whole obligation to the Yavmin is just chalitza. Neither of them, none of the surviving brothers can do yibum, because if there was one, then he would be the one to do chalitza. So since nobody can do it, the one can fulfill for the other. So if you learn like Tosfos' language that says that it's a weakness in the zika, so that makes sense that Shmuel is going to say, look, it's a weakness in the zika to everybody. Everybody has the same equally weak zika, so the equally weak chalitza can undo it. And it'll work for everybody. But if you learn like Rashi, that the point is not that it's a weak zika, but it's a weak chalitza and that can't work for the other. So why over here, who cares that the other one also has that weak problem? It's still going to be a chalitza. My chalitza shouldn't work for it, right? The one chalitza of this brother shouldn't work for the other because it's just not strong enough to end the issues. Each one has their own. The wording of the Rav Roman Ahar. Each one has their own zika. Him ending a zika is not going to end for the other. So why does that? Why does it change? So Rashi makes it a din. Rashi says at the end of Emtsais, Kesava chalitza psula ein tzricha lechaza kol ha'achim. That it's not a strength in the zika, weaker in the zika. So he disagrees with the concept. He holds that chalitza psula is just not a lack of. It's not a weakness that doesn't allow for the other. It does work for both. That's Rashi needs to say that line there, because otherwise, what difference does it make? You want to say something, Max?
You're saying that he just, from the fact he doesn't give a reason here, he just says what the din is without explaining it like he did before for Rav.
Right. He just say, what's this kasavar?
Yeah.
So according to the way Rabbi Yossi was saying before, that works with Tosfos. It's a very nice var. But Rashi doesn't say that, and Rashi needs to go into this one point. Kasavar chalitza psula in tzricha lechaza. He disagrees with it. He holds that that it does work for the other brothers. They don't have to go get chalitza from everybody. Rashi has to put that in right here at this point, because otherwise we don't understand what difference does it make. According to the explanation that we saw before, it's still not going to work for the brothers because each one has their own zika. Each one has their own issues. Yeah?
That's like the Ramban. So the Ramban would have to do something similar.
The Ramban, Rabbi Roman Ahar, yes.
Yeah.
So the Gemara then goes on to Balas Haget. Gufa Amar Shmuel, Chalatz la'achois le'nifter etzaros. Letzaris nifter achayis. If he did a chalitza to the sisters, their tzaras would not be exempt. But if they did it did a chalitza to the tzara, which is a proper, there's no isser, so there is a proper marriage there. So therefore, it's going to work for the achayis. Then he throws in cholatz laba'alas haget lo nifter tzara. And we explain what is a ba'alas haget. So when you're not that midarabanan, he gave a get to this woman. So midarabanan, he can know that works, even though midaraisa get doesn't work, but midarabanan it works. And now he, the yavam, can no longer do yibum to this woman. So what has Rashi said? What's the issue with the balas haget? Beis Yevomos mi'ach echad. V'nasan yavam get la'achas mehen shuvein chalitzasa higenes kol kach dekalisha zikasa v'mchalatz la lenifter etzara. Rashi throws in what we were saying before is a joint between Rashi's pshat and Tosafos pshat. Look what Rashi's doing here. He says he gave a get to the one. Now he cannot do chalitza anymore because a chalitza is not going to be so strong. Why not? Because he can't do yibum. He's not allowed to do yibum anymore. That should have been the end of Rashi. Then Rashi throws in the kalisha zikasa. The zika is strong, weak. And therefore, if he does the chalitza, it doesn't exempt the tzara. Why did he need to do that here? He's adding in a weakness in the zika that did not exist in Rashi before. And in fact, Rashi before clearly indicated that the zika was strong. As Rashi says, we saw the Rashi right before, in the middle of Daf Hashavua and Beis, where he says the loymafka is zika. It says zika is too strong, and the chalitza psula won't get rid of the zika. And here Rashi says that the zika is weak. So Rav Nachum and Rabbi Baruch have two different ways of saying what this is about. Rav Nachum says that Rashi holds that really the fact that she can't give a get, that she can't do chalitza after, can't do yibum after a get, is really not a problem. It brings a Yam Shel Shloima, the Marshal, who talks about the halacha of that the seder chalitza is that she removes the shoe and then she spits. If she spit first, once she spit, she can no longer do yibum, right? Yibum cannot be done anymore. Would you say, oh, so the chalitza of removing the shoe after that is a weak chalitza because you no longer do yibum? So the Marshal says, of course not. Because the reason you can't do it is because you already started to do chalitza. Even though you did it out of order, but you did one of the steps of chalitza. It's a part of the same chalitza. So you wouldn't say, well, since you already did a part of the chalitza, so you can no longer do yibum, that tells me the chalitza is weak. No, of course not. The reason I can't do yibum anymore is because I already started doing chalitza. So a get is the same. It's not that the oraisa part of chalitza, but it's already the beginning of the process of ending the ishus, ending the marriage. So what are you going to tell me? Oh, once you started that, you can no longer do yibum, and if you can't do yibum, that makes the chalitza weak. No, that's the strength of the yibum. The strength of the chalitza, because I already started it. Therefore, Rashi has to say that the fact that you've started the chalitza means you've damaged the zika. And it's only in this case that Rashi says it. Not in the previous cases.
You're saying because this is the only case where there's something actually, where the chalitza is actually better, or that there's nothing wrong with the chalitza?
There's nothing wrong with the chalitza. You've just started the chalitza. Let's say by mimer. Mimer is you're actually doing yibum. You started a yibum. You did a kiddushin, which is the beginning process of the yibum. Midarabana, right? But it's a beginning process of yibum. So there, you didn't weaken the zika. You actually strengthened the zika, but the chalitza is weak because you can't, right? The chalitza is going to be a chalitza psula because you already did the rabbanan that's obligating you to one of these. Obligating one of the yavamim to one of the yavamas, right? But
Yeah.
Here you actually, there's nothing wrong with this chalitza. Yes, it's true that chalitza has a weakness in that you can't do yibum. That's because you already started the process of ending the marriage. So then why is this going to be considered weak? For that, the Gemara needed to say. Rashi needed to say that it's actually, in as much as that it weakened in as much as it's the beginning of a chalitza, it also weakened the zika. That's what Nachman's talking.
Doesn't that create open a can of worms for Rashi's Shita now? Meaning, if we built up this whole idea that Rashi's arguing on Tosos, the Tosos is the zika man, the weak shvacha zika, and Rashi's the weak chalitza man. Right, so, and that Gufa, that's why he had to create this whole din and Shmuel of that you're not chozer al kol achim, because he doesn't hold of the weak zika. Doesn't it create a problem now that then he admits that there's such a problem of weak zika? Then why weren't you willing to say there's a weak zika in every other case?
Because over here, the only reason it's a weak zika because I started the chalitza. In all the other cases,
there's no weak zika.
There is no weak zika. He disagrees, right? That's what he says that. Loimafka zika. The zika is good, and it didn't damage the zika, and in fact, the chalitza is not strong enough to end the zika. Rashi's learning previously the zika is just as good. Over here, you actually have something that changes the zika because you already started the chalitza. By doing the get, you've started the chalitza. You've started undoing the marriage. In any case, but Rabbi Eli Baruch also didn't like it for the same reason. He says Rashi doesn't hold of a weak zika. So he says Rashi doesn't mean that it's a weak zika, that it says kalisha zika asa more than the tzara. The zika of the tzara is still going to be stronger than hers, and that's why it's not enough to exempt the tzara. And it's only in this case where you have two wives of the deceased, and one of them has no problem, and one of them has a problem, that's where we're going to say this. But in general, we don't say this. So he learns that it's a contrast, v'lo niftera tzara. It's only klape, the patur tzara, it's going to be weaker than the tzara zika. But it's not a weak zika. It's harder in the words of Rashi, but cleaner in the sugya. Rav Nachman is saying is saying a vart in this, in the point of the sugya. Rashi holds, of course, generally, the fact that it's a weak chalitza does not mean that there's a weak zika. In this particular case, because you already started the zika, you already started the chalitza, so the zika started disintegrating. Because you've already done a step in the weakening of the marriage. And also because who cares that you can't do that you can only do chalitza and you can't do yibum. The reason is because you started chalitza. You can't tell me it's a weakness in the chalitza. That's not a weakness in the chalitza. That's the strength of the chalitza. I started chalitza already. I started ending it. Yes, of course, I can't do yibum anymore because I gave the get. But that's not a weakness in the chalitza. That is the chalitza. I'm ending the marriage. So Rashi needed to come on over here and say, yeah, but there's another aspect of weakness now, which is that because of this, the zika itself is also weak. So those are the two explanations in this Rashi. This obviously we're only going through the steps in Rashi's pshat here, but it's fundamental in understanding Zika, right? And the process of Zika, like we said from the Ramban and the Rav Menahar, that if you hold Yesh Zika, it's Ishus, it's marriage. That means each brother is going to have its own marriage, and therefore a weak Chalitza can't undo it. Whereas if you hold Ein Zika, there is a commitment, there's a kinyan to each of the brothers, but the marriage, the Ishus, is only Eishus HaMeis. It's only the deceased brother's marriage is still there. So any Chalitza is going to end that for everyone, because there is no marriage left after that. And that's the